It has come to my attention that the James Bond community is separated into two distinctive camps. There are those who think that Die Another Day is an underappreciated classic, and there are those who are wrong. I know it's very tempting to talk smack about Die Another Day, Pierce Brosnan's fourth and final performance as James Bond 007, but I think it is actually a really, really terrific movie. More so than that, I hope you're sitting down for this one. It's my favourite Pierce Brosnan James Bond movie. I know, I went there. I admitted that on camera. But let me explain to you why. Okay, what is Die Another Day? Die Another Day is the 2002 James Bond movie, the fourth and final performance of Pierce Brosnan as James Bond 007, and it's a significant movie. Why is it significant? Because 2002 was the 40th anniversary of James Bond. So it is the 40th anniversary movie. 40 years earlier, Dr. No hit the cinema screens, and look, here we were all these years later with James Bond still going strong. So it's significant for that reason. Why else is it significant? Well, if your only metric for success is the Great American Dollar, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that to this day, adjusted for inflation, Die Another Day is still the highest performing James Bond movie of all time. Oh, it turns out I'm wrong. I'm so very, very wrong. And I'm even more wrong when you adjust for inflation. So let's just move on, pretend I didn't say that. So, I mean, yeah, if you just count the metric of the dollar as the only metric you're looking at, it's not just an underappreciated movie, it's the best James Bond movie of all time. Obviously, I'm not making that case. No, and that would be a very, very tough case to make. It's not the best James Bond movie of all time. It's not even the best Pierce Brosnan James Bond movie. I mean, if you're looking at it objectively, I think you'd have to say that Tomorrow Never Dies was the best, objectively, of the James Bond movies starring Pierce Brosnan. GoldenEye might be the best movie. It's not my favourite James Bond movie from Pierce Brosnan's tenure, because there are some things, I don't like the Eric Serra soundtrack, but like that's a fantastic movie. I watched it with my kids the other day, it just flies through. Tomorrow Never Dies though, brilliant. You've got that banging David Arnold soundtrack, you've got a really strong script, really great performances. World Is Not Enough, you know, very close second, but Die Another Day. Die Another Day. Yeah, it's not the best, but it is my personal favourite. And why is that? Well, because Die Another Day takes everything we know and love about James Bond and regurgitates it back to us like a mama bird to her little chirping chicks. But it does so in a way that takes everything one step further. And I think that's cool. And I appreciate that. What do I mean? Well, let's just look at the movie from the opening scenes, okay? We've got James Bond and his buddy doing the cheesy surfing. Maybe that was a bold choice. But he lands in North Korea, and James Bond and his buddies are doing spy stuff. I love that. You know, I love the Daniel Craig movies, but I have to admit, a lot of the time, like, the spy stuff kind of gets overshadowed by the James Bond as played by Daniel Craig character arc, whereas the opening of Die Another Day, it's like good old-fashioned spy stuff. James Bond has to intercept his helicopter with this diamond smuggler in there, and they trick it into landing, and then Pierce Brosnan is like, hello there, and he looks exactly like the guy that they pull out, and so Pierce Brosnan goes off disguised as this guy to do spy stuff. And what kind of spy stuff am I talking about? Well, he lands in the compound of this North Korean colonel called Tan Sun Moon. And what I love about the character of Tan Sun Moon, he's, in the way we are introduced to him, he's only in the movie for a very brief period of time, but I would argue it's a really effective introduction to a bad guy, because this guy, Colonel Tan Sun Moon, he's physically dangerous. Like, the opening scene is him doing all these punches and kicks to his anger management person in his back. So you can see he's like a physically dangerous person. And then there are just the beautiful scenes where he uncovers who 007 is, and he gives him this lecture about Western hypocrisy, but at the same time he's got all these $250,000 sports cars parked there. So even though he's talking about Western hypocrisy, he is an example of hypocrisy. I mean, he's got this like free market entrepreneurial side hustle going on beneath the eyes of his father, who is like a North Korean general of the traditional mold. So I love that, because he's kind of a complex, contradictory character. And then the opening scenes, you have that amazing chase with the helicopters, the hovercraft, and the explosions and the mines, and James Bond eventually kills Tan Sun Moon, we think, and then he gets captured. And this is another stage where Die Another Day does stuff that we've seen before and then takes it a step further, because we've seen James Bond captured. He gets captured every movie, and normally he escapes 20 minutes later, but no, not in Die Another Day. Die Another Day, he gets marched off to a North Korean prison camp, and he stays there for months, and the most horrible stuff happens to him. We know because they tell us. He gets stung by scorpions, and then they inject the anti-venom into him, which is like, that's Ian Fleming level sadism right there. It's delicious. We see him get tortured as the opening credits roll. We see him like plunged into icy vats. We see him electrified. We see him burnt. We see him beaten. He has to listen to that god-awful Madonna song for 3 minutes. So when we next see James Bond, he is a broken man. He's stumbling across that bridge between North and South Korea. We have never, ever seen James Bond like that before. We've never seen him broken like that. And he staggers across the bridge, and he sees that he's being traded for Zhao, the terrorist with the diamond facial that he gave him earlier. And James Bond immediately gets stripped of his 00 status and imprisoned on a boat in Hong Kong harbour. And that again, yeah, he got taken off his mission on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Yeah, he lost his license to kill in License to Kill. But this all takes it a step further. James Bond then promptly escapes. That's like the A-Team, isn't it? Promptly escaped from a maximum security prison. But yeah, James Bond fakes his own death, which is kind of clever, plunges off the side of the boat, emerges in Hong Kong harbour, dripping wet, wearing a pair of pyjamas, presumably with nothing on him at all, and walks into this super posh hotel. I like this because it shows that even though James Bond is a prisoner of his own people, he is immensely resourceful and immensely dangerous. It shows that he is actually a pretty competent secret agent, even when he doesn't have all the gadgets and the backing of Her Majesty's Secret Service. When he emerges in Hong Kong harbour and he staggers into that beautiful posh hotel, I love that scene because, once again, it takes everything we know and have seen before in James Bond movies and takes it one step further. Name a James Bond movie in which he doesn't arrive in some exotic locale and some fawning doorman shows him his beautiful hotel suite and he's like, yeah, Mr. Bond, and James Bond is normally like, this'll do nicely. Whoa, not in Die Another Day. In Die Another Day, he is standing there with his straggly beard, wearing nothing but soaking wet pyjamas, and the guy behind the counter is like, do you have a reservation, sir? Any luggage? And just the disdain that he has for James Bond is something we've never seen before, because James Bond is normally beautifully presented, and Pierce Brosnan plays that scene beautifully though, because he stands there with like water running down his nose, but he stands there as if he's still wearing a Brioni suit, as if he's just emerged from an Aston Martin. And when Chang, the hotel manager, comes over, he immediately starts treating James Bond as if he was wearing a Brioni suit, even though he's like wearing pyjamas and dripping wet. And I love that because, once more, it takes an established like trope of the James Bond movies, twists it in an interesting way, and makes Pierce Brosnan look cool as James Bond. The scene that follows, of course, James Bond knew that Chang worked for Chinese intelligence, and this is another example of where James Bond 007 proves that he is an immensely competent and resourceful secret agent, even without the backing of Her Majesty's Secret Service, because he's like, yo, Chang, got a passport, I'll go and knock off this Zhao fella for you. And before we know it, even though he is stripped of his 00 status, he has nothing on him whatsoever except those soaking wet pyjamas. He is off to Cuba. Yeah. And that shows that James Bond is the kind of bloke who gets stuff done. Cuba. One of the reasons I made this video is because a year ago I was writing my book High Point, and there is this whole scene set in Cuba that I wrote kind of as like a homage to the Die Another Day Cuba scenes. James Bond has obviously been to Cuba before. He was in Cuba, I believe, in the opening of Octopussy, but that wasn't really Cuba. That was like a country club in the south of England, a small aeroplane and some fake moustaches pretending to be Cuba. What I love about Die Another Day is, even though those scenes were filmed in Spain, they really try and make it feel like Cuba. You've got that banging introduction to Cuba. I think it's a track called Enter Havana in the David Arnold soundtrack, and I love that. When I was writing High Point and I had the Cuba scene, I actually had that playing in the background because that was kind of the aesthetic I was going for. James Bond arrives in Cuba and he goes to this cigar factory. And one of the beautiful things about James Bond movies in the past is, you know, when you go to an exotic locale, they try and give you a taste of it. And they succeed here because you see all the Cuban maidens rolling the cigars in their hands. You've got the big fat dude reading the newspaper or the microphone, and that's what happens in Cuba. James Bond stands there and asks for the delicatados, which of course the tobacco that never goes out, which is a secret code name for a sleeper agent. And we're introduced to Raoul. Who is Raoul? Well, Raoul would have been my second choice for the most interesting man in the world. He looks like the most interesting man in the world from those beer commercials. But even though, again, he's only in the movie for a few minutes, it's a beautiful performance. It's an actor called Emilio Echevarria who does it, and you can see he's this elegant, older Hispanic gentleman, and he understands what James Bond is up to, and he sympathises, and it's a beautifully played scene. And I like the fact that he then gives James Bond a handgun. Commander Bond, Bond Armory, I think it's a Smith & Wesson, correct me if I'm wrong, gives him those huge binoculars. I don't even know what type of binoculars those are. For some reason I seem to remember that there's actually a scene where you can see the Birds of the West Indies book by James Bond, who of course the author of that was the one that Ian Fleming stole the name from. I could have been making that up, I don't know. But James Bond is off again. He's off again on his mission. And he tracks down Zhao to this island. And I love that scene where he's like zooming off in the fast car. It's a 1950 Chevy, I believe. But to me, especially this being the 40th anniversary of Dr. No, it kind of reminds me of that beautiful Sunbeam Alpine that he drove in Jamaica during Dr. No. Anyway, the clinic. Yeah, so James Bond goes off to track down Zhao to this clinic, and of course this is where we have another scene that is a throwback to Dr. No. We have Halle Berry emerging from the water in that beautiful bikini, just like Ursula Andress did in Dr. No. And that, again, it takes something that we're familiar with, the Ursula Andress scene. That's an iconic scene in movie history, and it takes it one step further. What do I mean by one step further? Well, for a start, the bikini is orange. To follow on with that, though, it's Halle Berry. Now remember, this is 2002. Halle Berry is still an immensely beautiful woman, but in 2002, that was peak Halle Berry. I remember watching this movie in the cinema, and I was just like, oh, I'm going to remember this. This is going to be locked into my memory for the rest of my life. Halle Berry in an orange bikini with all that water dripping off her. Yeah, it takes everything we know about James Bond, it takes it one step further. And a lot of people give Halle Berry smack for her performance in it, but I kind of like it. I kind of like the way she's sassy and the way she delivers her lines and stuff like that. And I know every single James Bond movie, they always say like, oh, this Bond girl is an equal match for 007. And they definitely succeeded with that with Michelle Yeoh in Tomorrow Never Dies. But you do get the impression that Jinx is competent and capable. And she's also like sexually liberated in a way that we haven't really had the opportunity for Bond girls to be. So I like her. I like her. What else do I like about that scene? There's another movie trope about, I don't know if you know, I have plenty of South African friends, love South Africans, never met a South African I didn't like. However, in every single movie you ever watch, all South Africans are bastards. It's a weird thing. If you watch, what is it, Lethal Weapon 2? Or was it Lethal Weapon 2, I think, all the bad guys were the South Africans. You've got this song in England with Spitting Image called You'll Never Meet a Nice South African. And you have a South African character, obviously, in this, who's only in it for a few minutes. The script very clearly establishes that he's a bit of a bastard, and James Bond punches him in the face. And it's completely irrational, but I always enjoy scenes in which South African people get punched in the face. It is a terrible, terrible trope. It is not representative of South African people that I have met. However, it is always hilarious on screen. And James Bond punches this guy in the face and sends him whizzing off down the corridor in that wheelchair. And then he sneaks into the clinic. And I love that because it's just a beautifully elegant way of solving the problem of how to sneak into this place. It almost reminds me, if you read the old Saint books, of the way the Saint was always so capable of like instantaneous, off-the-cuff, elegant violence to solve problems. James Bond meets Zhao, he gets that diamond, he starts to figure what is going on, and the movie continues. And the moment the movie's been going at a real galloping pace, I kind of enjoy that. But it gets better. Can you see how enthusiastic I am about Die Another Day? I really am. It's quite infectious. Anyway, it gets better. Why? Because the next time we see James Bond, he is on an aeroplane. He is dressed in his beautiful James Bond suit. He is getting a vodka martini served to him. I've never been on a flight in which they serve vodka martinis, but apparently, according to the James Bond movies, they do exist one of these days. I love that because when he lands in London, for one of the only times I can remember in a James Bond movie, they play a contemporary song that is contextual to that scene. They play London's Calling by The Clash, which is a great song. And I remember 2002 was a really curious time. It was when being British was cool. You know, right now with Brexit and Boris Johnson and stuff like that, Britain isn't cool. But back in 2002, with the Britpop going on and stuff like that, it was cool to be British. And that scene of James Bond landing in the aeroplane, London's Calling by The Clash playing, it was like, yeah, Bond's back, baby. I like that. And that followed immediately on to where we got to meet Gustav Graves. And again, a lot of people will complain about Gustav Graves as a bad guy. I loved him. I loved him. Toby Stephens is a fantastic actor, but the way he played that role was amazing. Like the way he did that, the sneering thing. Every time he spoke, he had that sneer. That sneer, Mr. Bond. I'm looking at you like I just stepped on something. Disgusting. I was doing impressions of that for weeks after I saw the movie. It must have driven all my friends bonkers. But I really, really loved that. I loved Toby Stephens as an actor. I loved him in that role. He would have been a fantastic Saint, to be honest. He's done a lot of audiobooks, James Bond, as well, which are really, really good too. I loved the scene in which we get introduced to him, where he jumps out of the aeroplane in a beautiful suit. He has a parachute that opens, and it's the Union Jack parachute. And that is obviously a nod back to The Spy Who Loved Me, where James Bond, Roger Moore, skids off the cliffside, and his parachute opens, and it's the Union Jack, which was like really cool and new and original back then. In 2002, when Die Another Day came out, they managed to capture, I believe the word is like a zeitgeist of the time. And it's this weird thing of like life imitating art and then art imitating life and then the other way around. When this whole Brexit thing started, and you had our now Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, trying to drum up support for leaving the European Union. He did that cheesy thing where he did the zip line with the Union Jacks and he got stuck halfway through and then he was going round in circles and he looked like an absolute wally. But that stuck in my head because I was like, is he trying to recreate the scene from Die Another Day? Or is the scene from Die Another Day like trying to recreate something that hadn't happened yet? There was something about the pomposity of it that really resonated with me. And even though I know the scene took place before the whole Brexit thing, before Boris Johnson, before the zip line and things like that, it just always struck me as the writers really got what it was to be like British during that time and have that pomposity and that ridiculousness. And what I loved about it is that Gustav Graves as a bad guy did it right. You know, Boris Johnson did it and he looked like a jackass. But Gustav Graves, he like lands down on the thing with his parachute and he strips it off and he's this confident, swaggering dickhead in this beautiful suit. And it's just, you know, that's... Imagine what Boris Johnson would have been like if he had that swagger and that competence. I just loved it. Okay, so that's how we get introduced to Gustav Graves. And I do kind of like the whole thing of Gustav Graves because we know now, spoiler alert, it's nearly 20 years later, so hopefully you'll figure this out, that he is actually Colonel Tan Sun Moon, genetically modified to look different. But I love that because he created this character of Gustav Graves to be kind of like a twisted version of all of the excesses and exaggerations of James Bond. And I think it's done very cleverly and in an underappreciated way, because it does really like dig the knife into certain ridiculousnesses about being British and being affluent and being upper class. And I don't know. I'm not explaining it very well, but it worked for me. It hit all the buttons, and I was like, "You're a loathsome, disgusting individual who's also kind of like threatening and competent, which is something you want to have in a James Bond villain. And talking about threatening and competent, what happens next? Well, James Bond sets up a meeting with Gustav Graves, and you've got that cameo with Madonna, which is kind of ridiculous. She was going through that period in her life where she spoke with a British accent for no discernible reason. But then you have that scene where Gustav Graves and James Bond have the fencing fight. And I love that because, first of all, it's a cracking sword fight. I mean, it's over the top, it's ridiculous, it's meant to be. It goes through this beautiful London club, wrecking stuff and increasing the absurdity of the weapons. They start off with the little épées and then they end up with like broadswords smashing things and stuff like that. But what it establishes is what we had been established about Colonel Tan Sun Moon earlier, that he is a physical threat to James Bond. I mean, look at Tomorrow Never Dies, which is objectively the best of the Pierce Brosnan and James Bond movies. Elliot Carver, you know, James Bond could have snapped him in half like a pretzel, but no, not Gustav Graves. Gustav Graves was capable of kicking Bond's butt, and he nearly does so. And I love that scene as well, because it's pretty good at playing at like not just the arrogance and the insecurities and the vainness of Gustav Graves, and also Colonel Tan Sun Moon. You can see, like, he wants to beat Bond, and then he's almost willing to, like, break all the rules to do it. And you can see how tortured he is when he finally has to concede defeat. I love that for a reason I will get into in just a second. But before I do that, I have to talk about the location of this sword fight. This sword fight, according to all the things I read about it, was in a fictionalized version of Blades. Blades is a fictional London club that Ian Fleming invented, which was significant because M was a member of it. It's also significant because it featured quite heavily in a James Bond book, which I'll lean forward and get. Moonraker. And if you've ever watched Moonraker, it has very little to do with the movie of Moonraker, but there's the bad guy, Hugo Drax. Hugo Drax is actually a German soldier who got horribly mangled during the war and then adopted the identity of a British aristocrat. And it's so weird because I think it was Calvin Dyson who like pointed out the fact that Die Another Day, a lot of the script is like directly kind of inspired by Moonraker. I'd never realised it until he said that, but the scene in Blades is beautiful because just like in the book of Moonraker, Hugo Drax is kind of like caught cheating at bridge because you can, even though he is a successful affluent person with this evil plot to bomb London, he's very human and he's got this insecurity and this desire to cheat and get one over on people. And you can see that mirrored in the way Gustav Graves is so desperate to beat Bond in the fencing match. And I like that because it's a direct kind of like mirroring of what happened in Moonraker, in the same way that Colonel Tan Sun Moon creating this fake identity as Gustav Graves, who is like this, all of the things he feels are repulsive about upper class British society, mirrors the way Hugo Drax reinvented himself as a British aristocrat. So I'm rabbiting, but I like that. I like that a lot. The other final thing that I really like about that scene in particular is the cameo. And when I talk about the cameo, I'm not talking about Madonna. I'm talking about another cameo that I really, really liked. There is the doorman at the end of the scene who gives James Bond a key. And that cameo is a guy called Oliver Skeet. Oliver Skeet is known as a Rastafarian show jumper. He is originally born in Barbados. The ripe old age of 36, he decided he was going to become a show jumper, sold the family car, bought a horse, started doing show jumping. And I remember that happening at the time, because I come from a kind of like horsey background. I used to do show jumping as a kid and stuff like that. And of course, you don't have many Rastafarians doing show jumping. Show jumping is traditionally the sport of the upper class, the affluent, the kind of people who have access to horses. And then Oliver Skeet comes in and he is show jumping and he's moderately successful in it. And it's like, look at this guy. And I remember at the time thinking that Oliver Skeet was really cool, because to me he kind of represented, again, that zeitgeist of being British at the turn of the millennium, where being British meant so much more than the colour of your skin and your background and stuff like that. Britain had truly become such a multicultural society at that time. So you had Rastafarian show jumpers. The greatest comedians were like Lenny Henry. You had curry was the national dish. It's like, at the moment, Britain is this place that so much of its culture comes from all of the other cultures that it had so supposedly assimilated during the days of the British Empire. And to me, just Oliver Skeet always represented that, and I loved him having that cameo in Die Another Day. Whew! Anyway, let me write about what happens next. Yeah, so from that point, the movie moves over to Iceland, and we have the Ice Hotel. The Ice Hotel, I think, is a real place, but you actually have to go all bundled up and stuff like that, because it's going to melt if you central heat it, so you can have people in beautiful cocktail dresses and nakedly making love on these ice beds. But I love the ridiculousness of this ice hotel. I thought it was very cool. It was very Bondian. The other thing I loved when we went to Iceland was Miranda Frost, Rosamund Pike. I know originally, I mentioned before that Die Another Day was loosely based off kind of like the plot of Moonraker. The girl in Moonraker, the Bond girl, was Gala Brandt, who I always have a special place in my heart for, because she was the Bond girl that Bond didn't get. And I know originally they had considered making Rosamund Pike's character Gala Brandt, but in the end they created this new character, Miranda Frost, who I just love. Why do I love her? Because she's frosty, upper class, prissy. She's every single red flag of every single woman I should not have ever been attracted to, but she's just the perfect epitome of it. And I love her, and I think she's fantastic, and I think she's fantastic in those scenes especially, like when she makes love to Bond. I think it's great. I also enjoyed the scene where James Bond sneaks into what is actually the Eden Project down in Cornwall, and then you've got the laser scene and the fight with Mr. Kill. Isn't that a name to die for? It's all really good action-orientated stuff. When James Bond escapes in his Aston Martin, that's a fantastic chase scene. I love it. It's skidding on the ice, turning over, flipping the way he uses the ejector seat to like flip the car over, and then he has that cheeky grin with it. It's great. I will admit the movie kind of loses a bit of focus as we go on, and most people's criticism of Die Another Day, I think, occurs at this point, because of course you've got like the ridiculous stunt scene where he's paragliding and it's all very clearly CGI. I think it is a very legitimate complaint, because James Bond movies, as ridiculous and unrealistic as they are, one of the coolest things about them is, in general, all of the stunts are practical stunts, as in people actually did them. Like in The Man with the Golden Gun, where the car whizzes and does a 360-degree turn. That was a real stunt. They did that with a real car. And so it does completely destroy your suspension of disbelief and take you out of enjoyment of the movie when they have a very clearly CGI'd stunt scene. But I still enjoyed it. And as the movie continues, I was really invested in it, and I just enjoyed it a lot. And that's why I think it's underappreciated. I'm not arguing that it's perfect. I'm not arguing that it's the best James Bond film of the Pierce Brosnan era. But it is underappreciated because so many cool things happen in it. So many envelopes are pushed. There is a lot of like Bond lore, like the plot of Moonraker, the novel, that is like lifted from and used and given homage to. The ridiculous Icarus satellite that Gustav Graves has. I mean, people complain about that. They're like, oh, that's a stupid plot point. But it's like, that plot point was literally taken from the movie of Diamonds Are Forever. I'd say it's done better than the movie of Diamonds Are Forever, because I'm pretty sure you don't need a gazillion diamonds to make a satellite that fires laser beams. I don't know. If anyone knows how to make satellites that fire laser beams, correct me if I'm wrong. But I enjoy it for all of those reasons. And I honestly think if you sat down and watched Die Another Day again and like removed all your preconceptions and prejudices, you would enjoy it a lot more than you thought you would too. And I honestly think in a few years, people are going to start appreciating it in a new way. I don't think it's ever going to have a complete turnaround the way like On Her Majesty's Secret Service did. They used to think that was a bad Bond film. Now most people agree it's one of the best. Don't think Die Another Day is ever going to get there, but I do think Die Another Day is going to definitely have a resurgence in terms of people's appreciation for it. So that is my case. That is why I argue that Die Another Day is an underappreciated classic. But there's one more thing. I told you earlier that Die Another Day is my personal favourite Pierce Brosnan James Bond film. And I'll have to admit, out of all the wonderful arguments that I've given you, and of course they are wonderful, I'm being completely facetious there, the reason I love Die Another Day so much is actually not because of the movie, I have to admit. It's because of who I was when that movie came out. 2002. It came out, I think, the summer 2002, and I was working in Paris, and everyone knew it was the biggest James Bond film ever, so we all got together and we went to watch Die Another Day in the cinema. And the wonderful thing about Paris is there are so many tourists there. All of the latest American movies get released in English language with French subtitles, so we're going to go and see it in English. Really, really enjoyed it. But for me, it resonated so deeply because that was like this tiny snippet of my life, 2002 to like 2004, in which I was living the James Bond lifestyle. I was living in Paris. I was going to Hemingway's bar at the Ritz. I was going to Harry's bar at 5 Rue de Nous. I was hanging out with cool Americans. I was eating beautiful dinners. I was traveling around, having adventures and romances, and it was a really cool period of my life. One that I've never tried to recapture, but one that was really, really special to me. And I will admit, the reason I love Die Another Day so much is every time I watch that movie, it takes me back to being that version of me, and that version in my life. And that was a good time, and I enjoy it. And I felt really connected to James Bond at the time. Oh, you should have seen the clothes I was wearing back then. I used to go to all of the Paris clothing stores and buy myself these beautiful suits and things like that. Yeah. And I think, to be honest, everyone has a James Bond movie that speaks to them like that. You can make all of the arguments in the world about which are the best James Bond movies, which are the worst James Bond movies. You can say, like, oh, Goldfinger was the quintessential James Bond movie. Or you can say, oh, From Russia with Love was a quintessential James Bond movie. But there's one movie out there that other people might not like that means something to you because of who you were when you watched it. And for me, that's what Die Another Day was. And that's why Die Another Day is not just an underappreciated classic, but it is my personal favourite Pierce Brosnan James Bond movie. And cheers. Here is a toast to Die Another Day. Go and watch it again, and maybe you'll enjoy it a bit more too. Cheerio.